What if most briefs were just a game of Chinese whispers between an agency and a client? What if most briefs don't contain the basic information creative agencies need to start the creative process? What if a quarter of every marketing budget in the UK will be going to waste due to poor briefs? Surely this wouldn't be the case in the UK. Probably the world's most knowledgeable and advanced advertising market. But if it was, wouldn't that be worth talking about? Welcome to the UK results of the Better Briefs project. The Better Briefs project was started by two ex-agency strategists, Davies and myself, Pieter-Paul from Weiler, because we wanted to know why there were so many bad briefs in the world and on our desks. So we quickly discovered very little research has been done on the topic. And this made us really keen to produce some knowledge, some data to help understand why certain briefs fail and others succeed. So we needed a survey, and we reached out to what we think is the best research agency to help us with that, which is Flood & Partners. Luke Kapman here is going to talk you through a little bit of the methodology and the UK sample in our global study.
Thanks, Pieter-Paul. So we really enjoyed creating the survey for Better Briefs. For those of you that don't know Flood & Partners, we are a research agency dedicated to really just making surveys a richer source of insight. As you can see on the right, some screenshots there kind of show our surveys don't look like what you'd expect a traditional online survey to look like. We use some questions designed to get at that kind of instinctive type 1 thinking. So for example, if you look at the top right image there, that's our swipe question borrowed from a well-known dating app. And really, what we do use that for is to get people's gut reactions and gut feelings. Then we have another kind of different set of questions when we want to get at more kind of considered, deeper type 2 thinking. The other thing I wanted to say is that we work very, very hard to engage people with our surveys. So we make them as fun and engaging as possible. And actually, what we find is that means people really want to talk to us, unlike most surveys. And what we saw in this particular study was that instead of just short answers, people were giving us kind of paragraphs and even mini essays on how they felt about briefs. So let's take a closer look at who we spoke to. Of our UK sample of over 500 respondents, over 300 of them were marketers. About half of those were brief writers themselves, and then we had a good chunk of brief approvers as well. These were for a mix, as you'd expect, of different size of organisations, about half from kind of smaller firms, but actually we also got about a third from marketing departments with 20 or more people, so decent size organisations. In terms of, in the blue, the creatives, we got 200 of those, again, from kind of good mix of different roles and different agency sizes. And then the stuff in green there in the middle is actually true for both these two groups. So actually, we're talking to a fairly senior audience here. And just to note that this is obviously the UK data part of a much wider global study of over 1,700 respondents. So just a quick glossary of terms. And a note on the colour coding as we go into the results in a moment. We've got the marketers or the clients in their results will be in orange, and then you've got the creatives, the creative agencies in blue. And just to clarify and just reiterate, what we're talking about here is the marketing brief, because there are many different types of briefs out there, but this is the brief that sometimes known as the client brief, but it's the brief that clients will give to the creative agency.
Thank you, Luke. So we're going to present, we split the data and the findings into 4 sections. Later on, section 2, we're going to talk about some long-term trends, and we're seeing that issues around briefs are getting worse. Then we're going to have a closer look at who writes briefs and what's the difference between brief writers and brief approvers from an attitudinal perspective. We're going to end on a positive note and give you some data-based facts how to make briefs better. But we're going to start with some confronting stats. The UK is not immune from the issues around briefs. So there is a there's disagreement and disconnect between marketeers and agencies on what a good brief looks like. In the UK, just under 8 in 10 marketeers in orange believe they provide good briefs to their agencies. However, only 12% of the agencies agree with that statement. Now, don't just look at the absolutes, also look at the delta, the difference, the lack of alignment. Good briefs should summarize strategic thinking. 78%, over 3 in 4 UK marketeers believe their briefs contain clear strategy. However, only 6% of UK agencies are clear on the strategy in briefs. Are marketeers checking in with their agencies if the strategy is clear? Are agencies speaking up when the strategy isn't clear? Right? Both parties are at fault here. And then language is probably one of the most important tools in advertising. However, when it comes to language and words in briefs, agencies and marketeers seem to be speaking a very different language. So I guess it's not really surprising then to see that most UK agencies don't feel their clients have a good understanding of what they need from a brief. And that's the opportunity here. So what do they need from a brief? Well, above all else, they want objectives. They want to be clear on the objectives. They want to be clear on especially commercial objectives. They want to know what the commercial end game looks like for a client. So if you want to put a clear strategy in a brief, start with clear commercial objectives. Now, distant followers are insights, message, and target group. Let's have a closer look at target groups. So in blue, agencies, only 1/3 of all the agencies are clear on who the target groups, or who the target group is in a brief. Right? Who they need to go after. In a time where we have less and less budget and less time, surely it is super important to be clear on the target. And even marketeers themselves in orange, only 2/3 of them themselves are clear on who the target is, leaving 1/3 in the dark. So most agencies in the UK don't believe the briefs they are getting are good enough. And we asked a couple of questions around rebriefs. And at least here is something we can all agree on, that rebriefs are happening too often, wasting people's time, people's money, and people's talent. So we wanted to quantify that wastage. So we asked marketeers what they thought was the percentage of their marketing budget going to waste due to poor briefs. And we're fairly aligned. Brief approvers, brief writers, people with over 20 years of experience, and younger marketeers. And in the UK, it sits at 26%. Earlier, we released a global stat of 33%, so congratulations, you're sitting below that. And we think this is a more precise number because it's coming straight from the marketeers. Now imagine the opportunity. Imagine flipping this and having 26% more marketing budget. What would you do with that? The IPA did a piece of research back in 2003 on briefs, and we've used some of their statements in our survey. And this allows us to look at some trends. The good news is that briefs have never been more important. Right? We see a strong 10% uplift in the statement, it's difficult to produce good creative work without a good marketing brief. We all acknowledge that. However, less briefs are final and don't change. And we're seeing quite dramatic drops here with only 10% of UK marketeers and 6% of creative agencies agreeing to this statement now. They're very fluid. They change too often. And if the brief isn't clear, the creative process is often used to figure out what the strategy is. Agencies have been fairly consistent in their opinion on this, between 2003 and now. However, we see a dramatic rise in marketeers admitting they themselves or their organization is doing this. Okay. Let's have a closer look at who writes briefs and how these people differ in attitudes with brief approvers.
So, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a junior audience we're talking about. So even if we look at brief writers specifically, doesn't matter if we look at age, years of experience, how senior they are in terms of their position. What we get back is actually this is a senior audience we're talking to. So, actually quite surprising for us because we thought, based on some of these results, that actually maybe this was a bit more of a younger junior audience. Now building on what Pieter-Paul showed us earlier, where we saw that almost 3/4 of marketers don't think that the client brief is good enough. So we asked the same question to the brief originators themselves. Yeah. And what we actually can see is quite a lot of orange. So it means that the brief writers and the brief approvers, a lot of orange. They're either saying, well, it's not good enough or okay. 16% of brief writers, so the people actually writing the briefs, only 16% say, yeah, these are good briefs. So not a lot of confidence there in their own work. And actually, brief approvers, the situation's kind of even worse. 39% say the briefs they're approving are not good enough. So actually, these are the people that where the buck should stop with them, but it's not. So just a final element to this is that brief approvers are feeling less enthused about briefs than brief writers. So people approving the briefs emotionally are not feeling that as happy about the brief. So they're more irritated, they're more frustrated by the briefs that they're approving, less excited, less energized. So really, for us, this raises a big question. Why are the brief approvers specifically letting so many things through that actually even they don't believe are good enough either on emotional or a rational level?
Okay, first point, make briefs more succinct. Agencies believe that most of the briefs they get are either too long or too short. So sit down with your agency, sit down with your client and define what a succinct brief looks like for you. Second one, bring more structure into the briefing process. We're seeing that if brief writers operate in a more structured process, they feel more excited, they feel more energized, they feel less frustrated and less irritated by briefs. Third point, briefs are only a means to an end, right? In the end, it's a billboard or the idea that comes out of it. But we need to be super clear on the criteria that we will use to judge the work, to evaluate the work. And only 3 in 10 marketers and 1 in 10 agencies is clear on this. So define them up front and early and put them in a brief. And then lastly, simple one, let's agree which brief is going to be used to evaluate the work. Is it going to be the marketing brief, as most marketeers would prefer? However, a lot of them are using both briefs. Creative agencies obviously prefer to use either both briefs or the creative brief. Let's just have a discussion. I don't mind which one you use. Let's just be clear. Take the confusion out up front. So in summary, this is an invitation to reduce time and money lost on briefs. Sit down with your client or your agency. Be super, super clear on your objectives. And if you're not, push back. Be clear on your target audiences because those numbers are astounding. Be clear on the evaluation process. And most importantly, be clear on the strategy. And invest time to actually align with your client or your agency and close that gap. We haven't just come here today to confront you with this data. We've actually been working on a solution, and we've been working on a solution with the IPA and Mark Ritson, and we're very, very proud that this is launching today. We're launching a best practice guide titled The Best Way for a Client to Brief an Agency. Mark, are you here?
Thanks, mate. That was great. I've got 5 minutes to set up this wonderful new little report, and little in the best sense of the word, from the IPA. So I've never, I think I must have been involved in a dozen briefs into agencies in my whole career. So I don't think I can claim to be an expert. Normally, as the interesting agency stage begins, I'm desperately trying to get out of the building. Normally, when everyone else gets aroused, I'm normally leaving at that point because it's getting too close to tactics and I'm gone. So my role is to talk a little bit about clients and then the role that agencies, I think, can play. Let's start with an attempt to explain why it's so fucking terrible, right? I mean, those charts you've just seen are extraordinarily bad, and there's no incentive for anyone to be so miserable about it. So why do we have such a problem on the client side briefing into the agency side? There's a couple of problems. I've been aware for the last 10 years, I think, of a gradual shift towards, I made up this clumsy word, tactification. Clients are increasingly almost exclusively focused on tactics and the exclusion of strategy and also diagnosis. And they don't need to be that focused on tactics because they've got agencies to help them with that. But they're really in a bad place. So the first thing is they've forgotten to do strategy. And I think something that maybe to add to that data you've just seen, there's two questions here. I think often the agency world assumes this is a bad brief because these guys can't write a good brief. But I suspect for the most part, at least from what I've seen, briefing is kind of the stage 2 problem. The stage 1 problem is if you haven't got a coherent strategy, you can be, you know, the Steven Spielberg of brief writing, it's still going to fall apart. So I think there's a broader problem here at the client level, I know there is, which is the majority of clients don't have clear strategy to brief you on in the first place. I relate that a little bit back to training. Remember, we're a discipline that takes pride in not just that, but half the clients don't have any training of any kind in marketing or brand management. They're usually quite proud of it. And that makes us a very unusual idiot discipline. And one of the reasons the IPA is so important is it's done such good training for so long on the agency side. And we often haven't had the same thing on the client side. I think as well, the situation has not been helped by strategists. I don't think 10 years ago there were any strategists. Do you know what I mean? At least in the sort of, that's my job title thing. And there's a wonderful sort of cavalcade of people who are now all strategists, but they seem to make everything much more complex than it really is. You know what I mean? I mean, fundamentally, strategies are a bit like, you know, designing where you're going to lay your pipe. It's a practical discipline. It's not, it doesn't need to get too esoteric. And finally, most importantly, most clients are shithouse at time management. And I think what you're seeing in a lot of the data from the Better Briefs team is also just a function of if they were ever going to get a strategy, they're certainly not ready yet. And yet they're already briefing it in and then changing it as it's being briefed, which is no way to do anything. So one of the things I thought I'd try and do in a minute is explain what a marketing or brand strategy, and they're slightly different, but not really, what should it consist of? And you've already seen it in the data. But there's only really 3 things in a strategy when it comes to marketing or brand strategy. First of all, we've got to be clear on targeting. As Paul Peter showed you, it isn't at the moment. And remember, targeting's got a lot more complex in the last 5 years. So mass marketing is back. You know, if you're following this dialogue that's going on in the discipline, most people are now pretty sure personalization is a total bag of balls. Many are also ready to get rid of segmentation, and mass marketing is the coolest thing in town, sophisticated mass marketing. So I think clients have to decide first, what's my approach to targeting before I even do targeting? Do I believe in segments? Do I believe in sophisticated mass marketing? How do I define the sophisticated mass market? So there's a real challenge to do with targeting, which I think is important because it's been oversimplistic for too long. But that doesn't excuse clients not being clear on who are we going after. Linked to that is the job of a position, not the message, but my brand position. And again, we've made a mistake over the last 20 years. We've made brand positioning an end in itself. It's become a presentation deck or a godforsaken brand book. All positioning is the intended brand associations, right? If we have 3 brain cells, and we probably don't in the client's head, What do we want them to think when they think about our brand after the salience has been achieved? We've turned this into this nonsensical, multi-concept approach, which again has made it very difficult to be clear. And again, as you just saw a moment ago with the data, something I've been conscious of for a long time, most marketing clients can't and don't have any form of idea what an objective is. And it's not, again, that complicated. We know from reams of research, depending who you talk to, you should only go into that brief with between 1 and 4 objectives, certainly not beyond 5. And there's tons of data to support that. And each of those objectives should be smart. It should have a benchmark and a goal and a time by which it will be achieved. And that sounds like an undergraduate skill, but it's gone from most strategies and briefs. If you had these 3 things here, you would be in that sort of top 5% of clients in the Better Briefs data. So we're not talking about complex stuff. We're just talking about doing the basics well. And I don't think there is a perfect answer to this shit. I think marketing science is one of the most unhelpful terms we've ever come up with. It's just about having a good answer based on the data to these things and being coherent and consistent. And clients simply aren't doing that. And so my final point is, what does this mean for agency world? I mean, the most stunning stat of all the Better Briefs data is the one where, does the brief provide clear strategic direction? And 80% of clients go, yeah. And 5% of the agencies go, yeah. I've never seen data that looks like that in that kind of contrast, right? And talking about the same thing. But the question is, and it's come up a lot since this data's come out, okay, the clients are shit at briefing. That's one conclusion. But the other question here is, why have agencies let it get so shit? And that's an intriguing question, yeah? And I don't know the answer, but there are a few things that you could throw into that gap, right? One of them is cowardice, right? And I'm not saying this is true, I'm saying, is it true? Have agencies become, from the Hegarty era, have they become less bold for various reasons? That, do they feel less confident? And are they scared to tell a client, hey, this is not clear, guys? Do agencies, even if they are brave enough, do they have the authority anymore to do this? Again, in the age of Accenture and everyone else getting involved in the business, do the top creative agencies feel as if they can still tell this to clients? Is there something wrong with tenure that we now don't have those marriages, certainly not those exclusive marriages, where we were able to have a coffee or a beer and just say, look, it's not there, Is it a function of a relationship? And finally, and I don't know the answer to this, but is the agency world actually any more expert than the client world, which we've already learned is pretty poor right now? Can agency professionals, can planners actually produce decent, smart objectives? Are they aware of the literature on how many objectives to drive successful strategy? Do they understand about sophisticated mass marketing, two-speed marketing, etc. when it comes to targeting? I hope they are, but they may not be, and they may not be any better than the clients themselves. So I think that, there's some complex things going on and some real challenges. I think the thing that I applaud most about this report is I think it can help in all of these 3 areas. I think it can help clients be less shit at briefing because it's a nice, simple, beautiful document. I think it can tell them what their strategy should look like even before they get to briefing. And I hope agencies can start to use the conversation on briefs to kind of swim upstream a bit more and challenge clients, the ones that can be challenged, to help them. I worked for McKinsey for many years when I was younger. And, the idea of client leadership was a central core principle of the firm. And it's not complex, right? Client leadership is, I'm going to tell you that what you're about to do is incredibly fucking stupid. But if you decide to do it, I will come with you and die on that mountain with you. But please don't do it. But I'm coming with you, right? Can we engender that same kind of client leadership in agencies where we can use the absolute horrendous state of the brief to say, hey, guys, either this is a bad brief or the strategy is not there. Can we help you? Yeah. Wouldn't that be an amazing way to reinforce client value at a time when agencies need to enforce that. Anyway, that's my bit over. Back to the studio.